Kalimera, and welcome to Stupid Ancient History, Stupid A-Level Greeks. The sun's shining, I'm wearing a toga, and today we're going to look at the post-war settlement following the Persian Wars of 480 to 479. And always, just a little disclaimer, this is simply an overview narrative of what the events of the period, a guide to your further study. This is in no way a replacement for studying the original text. If anything, this is your kind of overview guide to the kind of things you will find. It is, of course, absolutely essential you continue to study the original text in some detail, because this is what you're going to be examined on. So, previously on Stupid Ancient History, we've been looking at the impact of the Persian Wars on Greek and non-Greek relations, and how, despite not being natural allies at all, Athens and Sparta formed the Hellenic League to repel the evil Persians, or what they saw as the threat from afar. And obviously throughout the Persian Wars we looked at the Battle of Thermopylae, Battle of Artemisium, Salamis, Mycale, and I've missed off Plataea, and how these various events demonstrated how the Greeks were not only able to repel a force significantly larger than them, but it also really laid bare some kind of key issues about their relationships, and particularly the fact that no one's more likely to betray a Greek city-state than another Greek city-state. But it is definitely worth pointing out that the positive impact of Persia's invasion was to strengthen this Greek unity. It seems that nothing makes something more solid than external pressure. This is definitely the case with the Greeks, and it just turns out that external pressure was Persia. The problem is, however, once the Persians go, everything starts to fall apart, and that's where we start now. So when we start looking at what I've called the post-war settlements, it's basically the events between 479 and 477. First thing we've got to say is there is a lot going on in a relatively short space of time. And even though this is the end of the Persian Wars, this is not the end of war with Persia. The Persian Wars basically end with the expulsion of any Persians from the Greek mainland. It doesn't mean that they stop fighting. Herodotus ends his narrative at the siege of Sestus, which is a city-state on the Hellespont, which makes a good point for us to start off. It's also kind of the jumping off point for the next phase. So let's see what's happening at the siege of Sestus. So the siege, it seems, like we said before, is this jumping off point for a continuing campaign against the Persians. They've chased what was left of the Persians out of mainland Greece, and now they're looking at this decision: do we continue our campaign against Persia? And the answer is yes. But this campaign, it seems to be primarily to, should we say, liberate those Ionian Greek states that have been under Persian rule for quite some time. This transition at Sestus also throws up one of our next issues, that Thucydides, who is the main source for what we look at next, and basically for the rest of the century, Thucydides calls this part of the century the Pentacontatia, which means 50 years peace. Which there is no peace. This is the problem. The Pentacontatia is what he calls it, but it's wrong, because there isn't peace. The Greeks, particularly the Athenians, are still continuing their fight with the Persians. And again, from a practical point of view, we've also got an issue at this point with the kind of the source material. This post-war settlement period, while there's an awful lot going on, this is where we leave Herodotus and pick up with Thucydides. Now obviously these two did not get together and decide, I'm going to stop here, why don't you pick up the very next day. There are gaps in this handover and this transition. There's also going to be issues with how the two authors write. So you are going to have gaps that we need to look at. And again, another thing that we'll come back to later on in terms of problems is when we look at the Pentacontatia, it's generally accepted that this period of Thucydides' work is largely unfinished. If you compare it to a lot of his later work, you can see there's a stark lack of detail. There's a lot going on without any detail. So it reads more like a structural outline in comparison to his later work. So there's going to be gaps. So problems and issues aside, the next problem is, well, right, where do we begin? And to my mind, it probably makes sense to begin with the hangover that's left from the Persians. I mean, just because they've left the Greek mainland, the problems are still there. And the big hangover that everyone's got to deal with at first is this issue of Medizers, those Greeks who joined the Persians. So if you think back to the creation of the Hellenic League and the terms of the Hellenic League, one of the key bits of it was that no one should secede from this league, and if you were to do so, this will be punishable by death. Dun dun dun. Clearly they want to make a big deal out of this. Now this has obviously raised the issue of Thebes. Thebes, as you know, Mediz during the Battle of Thermopylae, well, after the Battle of Thermopylae, and made it worse by fighting against Athens in the Battle of Plataea. This is only made worse when you throw into the mix the already long-standing hatred between the two. It's not a surprise that Thebes were keen to fight Athens for the Persians at the Battle of Plataea. You can argue that that was just a grudge match waiting to happen. But then, given this hatred between the two and the way it's escalated, it's not a surprise that Athens, particularly when we come to the end of the Persian Wars, these are the ones who are particularly pushing or driving for Thebes to be punished and effectively destroyed for Medizing. Interestingly, Sparta, however, take a much more restrained approach to this, which you could argue is quite unusual given the Spartan mentality where everything seems to be victory or death. But they take a much more restrained, I don't want to say relaxed, but maybe savvy approach to this idea, and they argued against the destruction of Thebes. Given the two polemics in the Greek world, and these are the two powers, ultimately this pushes Thebes to become allied with the Peloponnesian League, more out of fear or hatred of Athens than out of their love for Sparta. It makes sense. If you've got two choices, you can go down two different paths. One is offering you fiery death, and the other is offering you, well, just carry on doing what you're doing. They obviously side with Sparta, not out of any grand political alignment or unified ideas or views, more that Athens were being horrible to them. Similarly, though, it's not just Thebes that find themselves in this predicament. Macedonia, who had been a subject of Persia since before Xerxes' invasion, they also find themselves very quickly aligning with the Peloponnesian League, again because they don't really fancy the Athenian retribution. Now, unfortunately for Sparta, this almost accidental or unintentional growing of the Peloponnesian League, that's about as good as it gets for this period of Greek history. And more annoyingly for them, quite a chunk of their misfortune is their own doing. Well, it's not their own doing, but a lot of it has to do with one man, and this is the Spartan regent Portsanius. Portsanius, following his success at the Battle of Plataea, he's obviously made quite a name for himself, and he's leading the Spartan forces about to embark on some kind of new Ionian campaign. He's become a respected general, he's a military figure, so he's the natural choice for any ongoing Greek campaign against Persia. Now here it seems though Pausanias speaks, I think the actual term is, speaks quite harshly either to or about the Ionians, who are these potential new allies to the Greek world and potential new allies to Sparta. As a result, the Ionians completely wash their hands of Sparta. They want nothing to do with these guys who've just been horrible to them, completely dismissive to them, and they, in the exact opposite direction of Thebes, they are now allied. They become more natural allies of the ever ambitious Athenians, who obviously welcome them with open arms. One of the things we've got to bear in mind at this point is there is this underlying drive that the Athenians are trying to build something that will rival Sparta. They see themselves as the heroes of the Persian Wars. They think they should be at the top of the pile instead of Sparta. So the more allies they can gather, the better. But that's not all. That's not where the story of Portsanius stops. So it seems, whilst in Asia Minor, it seems that Portsanius has become, shall we say, involved with a member of Xerxes' royal house, and there is even the suggestion that he married Xerxes' daughter. Duly, as a result of this, he returns to Sparta once the Ionians turn on Sparta. They don't want anything to do with them. Portsanius returns to Sparta, and he makes the really stupid mistake of turning up wearing purple trousers. This seems silly, but this is a big no-no in Sparta. For one, they don't wear trousers, little skirty things. That's all the Spartans are into. But also purple. It's the royal colour. It's an incredibly expensive colour, and he may as well walk back to Sparta with a big flag saying, I've aligned myself, shall we say, with Xerxes. This goes down about as well as a baby thrown off Mount Taygetus in Sparta, and Portsanius has to go on the run. They are after him. They want to punish him for bringing massive amounts of shame on Sparta. He goes on the run. The Spartans chase him, and Portsanius decides, well, he's quite crafty, and he decides, well, the Spartans are an incredibly pious people. Where can I hide that I know they won't come and get me? And then he has this brainwave. I don't know, I'll hide in a temple, which he does. And he's thinking, ha, take that, Spartans. I know you're very religious. I know you'll never desecrate a temple by killing me in it. And they don't go into the temple to kill him. He's absolutely right. Instead, they decide to wall him up in the temple, and he starves to death in there. So that's him out of the way. He's been dealt with. The man who basically handed the Ionians to the Athenians on a platter, and then shacked it with Xerxes' daughter. Either way, the shame and the embarrassment and this harsh treatment of potential allies mean that Sparta effectively retreat from any role in the wider Greek world for a while. They go home and they lick their wounds. This has been a massive scandal. It is the equivalent of the tabloids have caught them wearing purple trousers, and everyone knows, and Sparta simply redress themselves. They retreat back to Sparta, lick their wounds, fall back into their natural habit of isolationism, and wait for everyone to forget this massive scandal. So, meanwhile, back in Athens, like Portsanius, the Mysticallys, let's not forget him, he's been able to use his reputation and his war record to become basically the big cheese in Athens. He is the man who makes things happen. And he uses this position of quite significant power and influence to further his own ideas. We've got to point out Themistocles being Themistocles, bit of a pirate, I always liken him to a Han Solo character. He is very gifted, very skilled, bit of a smuggler, and when his ideas align with the ideas of Athens, almost unstoppable. Death Stars explode, the lot. But he is, to some extent, in the long run, self-serving. So he uses his position to further his own ideas, and at this point it seems his ideas and Athenian goals align. So it's for Athens, not just for himself. Yet. Don't worry, that comes. So, either from his experience during the war, or his natural political position as he's a bit of a radical Democrat. He's all about Athenian superiority. He fully buys into this idea that Athens are the greatest power in Greece. Themistocles seems not to consider Sparta either, one, the power that everyone thinks they are, or B, a worthy or valuable ally. Like I said, this could be from his position as a radical Democrat, or it could also be from his experience of basically picking up after Eurybiades' mess during the Persian Wars. Either way, Themistocles, man in charge, man in power, he is firmly rooted in the camp that believes that Athens should be the new leaders of the Greek world. And he takes this opportunity and the position provided by it for him, and he sets about deliberately antagonising Sparta. Now we should point out here that Themistocles doesn't represent everyone in Athens. Athens is deeply divided about how to progress, particularly relating about what to do with Sparta. Do they befriend them, do they work with them, or do they see them as old, obsolete and inadequate? So there are massive divisions in Athens about this issue at the time, and it seems that whoever takes the archonship is the one who tips the balance, and at this point it's Themistocles, and he's tipped the balance firmly in favour of those who want to antagonise Sparta because they don't see them as a threat, or not the threat everyone thinks they are. So you're hopefully asking, what does Themistocles do? How does he go around winding up these Spartans? So, again, he is a crafty bugger. That's one thing you can definitely say about Themistocles. He will hustle you from here to next week before you even know what's going on. And this is exactly what he pulls with the Spartans. He plays them just like he played Xerxes, and let's face it, he played Xerxes like a cheap fiddle. So, as part of the Athenian rebuilding program, let's not forget the Persians have just previously burnt Athens to the ground, not once but twice. In amongst all this building and rebuilding and construction, Themistocles starts building walls around the city. Now these are not the long walls, those come later, but he starts building fortifications around the city as part of the building work. As soon as word gets to Sparta about this starts setting off alarm bells. This is not the kind of thing allies do. I mean, with the Persians on the back foot and back in Persia, why would Athens need walls unless they're planning some kind of future conflict with Sparta or Sparta's allies? So it seems a shady move. The Spartans don't like the fact that Themistocles is ultimately trying to fortify the city, almost knowing how bad Sparta are at conducting siege warfare, and they suck at it, and you'll see that later on. But yeah, they do not like this. So rather than just kicking off straight away, they still remember being embarrassed by Portsanius, still licking their wounds. They decide to send envoys to Athens to see if the rumours are true. Lots of people claim to be building walls that never actually get built. We'll just leave it at that. And they want to see if this is Themistocles as well. So these Spartans get sent off to Athens to go and inspect the building work and find out, is he building walls or is it just a rumour? Now Themistocles knows full well what reaction these walls will have. This is not a surprise to him. This is the reason he's doing it. He's not building a wall to keep people out. He's building a wall to send a clear message to Sparta. And he knows that if he completes them, given the lack of naval power, bear in mind that's Themistocles' bag, given the lack of naval power, Sparta will have no effective way of challenging Athens. So he knows if he can pull this off, he's put Athens in a very strong position, basically twisted Sparta's nipple until they don't like it. So when the envoys arrive, Themistocles, delays them. He takes them on tours of the city. He shows them the temples, because, they like a good parade. He shows them, look, we're rebuilding the harbour, we're rebuilding this district of the town. He shows them the best Athenian hospitality. They keep wanting to see these walls. He's like, yeah, we'll get to the building sites. Have you seen this? And once he runs out of ways to delay them, he effectively starts holding them captive. I mean, they're not thrown down into the pit of criminals, nothing like that. But they are basically held captive or hostage in Athens, so they can't go back to Sparta and say, yeah, he is building walls, we should do something about it. So, needless to say, as much as Themistocles is a master hustler, all this delaying of the Spartan envoys is not making Sparta any more at ease. If the whole idea of, passing off the Spartans is to calm them down, it's having the exact opposite reaction. They are getting more anxious. They're now worried about their missing men and worrying what on earth is going on. So, to try and calm and reassure them, but really delay it a bit further and give the Athenians enough time to finish the walls, Themistocles offers to visit Sparta in person, almost offering himself up as tribute. Just say, look, it's all above board. Even if it's not above board, I am effectively your hostage. Why would I put my life on the line if I was pulling a fast one? So he offers to go to Sparta in person. And it's a kind of grand act of diplomacy. Like I said, he's basically making himself a security deposit. But bear in mind, this is Themistocles. And what's clear from what comes next is that he has absolutely no intention of ever following through with this suggestion. He is simply playing the Spartans out, styling out his delay a bit more. So what we find is that on his journey south to Sparta, it seems Themistocles is conveniently and continually delayed. Oh, he had to stop off somewhere. Oh, someone wanted to speak to him. Oh, the road was busy. Oh, the traffic was terrible. You can imagine the delays. His dog ate his wheel. Every possible excuse in the world is used to conveniently delay him to the point where he never actually gets to Sparta. He takes the really scenic route. And conveniently, this takes him right up until the point where the walls are finished. And when the walls are finished, Themistocles simply goes back to Athens, never having actually reached Sparta, releases the envoys, the hostages, who go back to Sparta and tell them what's gone on, and the Spartan leaders decide whether or not the actions of Athens is justification for a declaration of war. Is it a declaration of war act? It's certainly not a cool move for a friend, but he's not necessarily done anything terrible. The delaying of the envoys, again, he didn't throw them in a prison, he kept them in a nice house. It's not technically an act of war, it's just not cool. So the Spartans are left now to decide what to do. Does this deserve a declaration of war? And clearly left unchecked, this resolute in his belief in Athenian supremacy, Themistocles would clearly have pushed Sparta to the point of declaration of war and Athens much sooner than they actually did. It is very feasible that Athens and Sparta, if Themistocles was left to do what Themistocles wanted, it's very possible they could have come to blows much sooner, almost within a few years of sorting out the Persians. So with Themistoclesing about and generally getting on Sparta's nerves, we've got to ask the question, well, so why wasn't war declared? What happened to calm the Spartans, who by this point, it's fair to say, are not best pleased? And again, it becomes really clear that Themistocles' actions are not just pushing Athens and Sparta close to war, but they're really starting to worry or get on some Athenians' nerves. They see what he's doing, and he becomes very unpopular in certain circles of Athenian political life because they see he's a bit of a wild card. He's a loose cannon. He's going to cause some real problems. He is not above, making false claims and writing on the side of a bus. If left unchecked, the Athenians quickly realise this guy's going to cause them a lot of problems. So as a result, there's a determined move in Athens to sort this fella out, to weaken his base. And Themistocles starts to lose quite a chunk of his influence in Athens. It's almost like this wall escapade is a step too far, and the rest of the Athenian assembly take one look and go, whoa, 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 what are you doing? He's that one person who's got to go that bit too far at the party, or the guy who's had too much to drink at the wedding, and everyone else is going, no, 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 leave it, stop, calm down, you're gonna make it worse. So he starts to lose a lot of his influence, and ultimately he's ostracised in 470. Not only because of his antagonisation of Sparta, but he's been Themistocles. So he is gone. Almost as soon as this wall escapade is done, he is not quite ostracised, but he's put on a back burner. And instead of this radical and headstrong Themistocles at the helm in Athens, we see the assembly take a shift to a more kind of sensible and calm and measured and diplomatic approach. And they basically favour Aristides, who's Themistocles' long-term rival. Aristides is well known, not just in Athens, but across Greece, as being a calm, sensible head on wise, experienced shoulders. He's Aristides the Fair. He, in turn, though, is also supported by a guy called Cimon. Cimon is the grandson of Miltiades, the famous general from the Battle of Marathon, so he comes with all that kind of awesome pedigree. He's also a well-known Spartan sympathiser. This is not a secret to anyone. He is a Spartan sympathiser. I mean, he even called his son Lacedaemonius. You can't get more obvious than that. And he's currently leading the Greek forces in Asia Minor, liberating the Ionian states. But the fact that Cimon is now in this top tier of Athenian leadership clearly is meant to send more friendly signals to Sparta than having Themistocles anywhere near anything that could cause problems. So this shift in leadership and a series of friendly gestures by the two seem enough to pull Sparta back from a war footing and to a more accommodating position. Let's be clear, they're not friends, but if we think about kind of the push toward this Thucydides trap as being edging closer and closer to a cliff edge, the actions of Aristides and Cimon managed to pull them back from the edge a bit and maybe take a few steps back, whereas Themistocles was all about running out that cliff edge headlong and seeing what the hell happened. So not friends, but not ready to throw down. So now that we've got the main chunk of the narrative out of the way, we should kind of like have a think about, well, what does all this mean? What on earth is going on? So there's a couple of key points we really need to take from this quite busy period. I mean, one thing we can definitely say is that these first few years of peace, in inverted commas, really set the tone for the rest of the century. If you think about the comparison between Greece in the 5th century and the 20th century, the parallels are obvious. What you're entering into here very much is a kind of Cold War in the ancient world. There are periods of increased tension and then periods of détente where this tension is relaxed, and we see this really quickly within these couple of years, this particularly shift between Themistocles and Aristides. Again, if we think back to some of the concepts we've thought about before, the idea of the Thucydides trap, that the the rise of Athens is, and their attempt to dislodge Sparta is going to lead to war. Well, this is already set in motion. No sooner has Xerxes been defeated, then these divisions emerge. The Thucydides trap is in full swing. It seems that these two sides, Athens and Sparta, are inadvertently heading straight towards that cliff edge of war. But let's have another step back a bit further and have a look at, well, how's things faring for each individual city-state? If we look at Sparta, this seems to be the beginning of a period of inaction. They've basically, well, they've gained the support of Thebes and Macedonia, so that's in the win column, but they've failed to capitalise on the possibility of an Ionian alliance. And we can go back to this phrase that the exam board likes to use, that have they failed as leaders of the Greek world? They've shunned a whole chunk of the Greek-speaking people because of the actions of one man. And again, certainly the shame brought about Portsanius has left them hiding away and licking their wounds. We go from this point where they were all dynamic and active and big and strong and powerful during the Persian Wars, and they've just reverted back to a point of, yeah, I'm not bothered, let's just go home. They're just tired, they've almost had enough, but they're still not quite ready to lie down, hence the relationship with Athens. But they are certainly not the big, bold, chest-beating warriors that they like to think they are. If we look at Athens, however, we see a very, very different story. So Athens are arguably, they start this century as the underdog, and now this underdog's growing teeth. It's a very, very different story to Sparta. Sparta are in decline, Athens are on the rise. I mean, they are buoyed up by their success in the Persians. The Athenians seem to be setting their course to dominate the Greek world, and as we've said before, they absolutely will use their war record during the Persian Wars to back this. This is their propaganda. We were the ones who defeated Persia at Marathon. We were the ones who defeated Xerxes at Salamis. We are rightfully the leaders of the Greek world. Now let us come to your towns and join us in our new cool alliance. They're far more aggressive and expansionist. And key to this is the Ionian states. They see the Ionian states literally as free real estate through political means. It helps as well that they are driven by kind of very determined, single-minded individuals. Themistocles, obviously, I mean, he will happily ride the horse of Athenian glory and just trample everyone in its path and really run over Sparta's feet and wind them up regardless. There's a dedicated, determined group of Athenians at this time who definitely think now is Athens' time to become the leaders of the Greek world. We should point out, though, that they are only reined in by this more cautious shift to the likes of Aristides and Cimon. It's almost like common sense prevails and stops Athens doing too much, too quickly and too aggressively, whilst Sparta is in this now new vulnerable state. They're not the big power they think they are. And then once we've gone over the key issues, obviously there is the other issue. It's the AO3, the sources issue, and particularly this transition from Herodotus to Thucydides can be problematic. I mean, if we start with Thucydides, we'll start with the obvious things to mention. Thucydides is a very well respected writer. If ever you get a passage from Thucydides or you're writing about this latter part of the century, do mention that Thucydides is incredibly detailed, specific, well researched and so on. However, if the question being asked or the point making is about the Pentacontasia, do point out that it is patchy. Any part of this 50 years piece is patchy. It's believed to be unfinished by scholars, and it's more of a structural outline. So it doesn't necessarily give us the depth and the detail that later examples of the Thucydides do. The other thing we can talk about, and it really helps actually in terms of plugging the gaps where Herodotus stops and Thucydides carries on, given that this period is sort of dominated by key individuals, a good way to bridge this gap and fill these holes and give a continual narrative is to look at Plutarch, and particularly his biographies of Themistocles, Cimon and Aristides. I mean, we have to remember, he's a biographer, and he's going to look specifically at things that emphasise the role of these individuals, that emphasises the character of these individuals, but he's really useful at plugging these gaps. He really helps us bridge the end of Herodotus and the start of Thucydides. So it's definitely worth, again, if you're talking about this period, referencing Plutarch and mentioning what he can bring to the table. And as an extra little benefit, I mean, we know Plutarch, he was less of a fan of Herodotus, called him the father of lies, but we know he's absolutely a fan of Thucydides, and very often throughout the works, particularly on people like Aristides, we can see that Plutarch is heavily influenced by what Thucydides has written, but again, he acts as this bridge. So very quickly, as a 1 minute summary, period following the Persian Wars, there's a lot going on. Thebes and Macedonia joined Sparta because they hate Athens and Athens want them dead. Sparta then completely mess up any opportunity to expand into the Ionian states by basically being mean to them, slagging them off. Sparta then go into this period of remission because Portsanius turns up in purple pants and everyone goes, "Whoa, what are you wearing there?" Kill him, but have to suffer the shame. On the other side, Athens absolutely on the rise. They are all about expansion. Themistocles is doing his best to wind up the Spartans by building walls until Aristides and Cimon come to power, tell him to wind his neck in, and enter into this new period of semi-cooperation with Sparta. But again, we have this whole issue of periods of hostility and détente. Oh, and just in case we'd forgotten, Athens is still at war with Persia. So, thank you for listening. I hope this has been useful, informative and not too rambly. Apologies if it seems a bit long. As always, leave a comment below, and until next time, goodbye.